Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm joining you via Zoom from the unceded territory of the Snuneymuxw people, a Coast Salish nation. My name is Donna Morton, and I think I've been an Edgewalker all my life, and I'm excited to introduce you to this wonderful group of people that are pushing, pulling, transforming, radicalizing the edges of finance. And I will pass the baton to my colleague, Adam.
Thank you, Donna. It's wonderful to be on the stage in front of you, and for everyone that's online, we're in the same boat with you. Even though we can't see you, my name is Adam Lerner, and I'm one of the co-founders of Edge Finance with Donna, and also founder of Solvable. I'm calling in from Vancouver, British Columbia, colonially named for the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples' lands. We want to offer our sincere thanks here before we begin to Cassie, Vicky, Ashanti, and Eleanor for their support in bringing this social technology of the fishbowl to the stage. It's not without its own technical problems, and hopefully you won't see any of those, but we are trying to do something novel here, but for good reason. Likely many of you have participated in an in-person fishbowl. In our Edge Finance Accelerator over the past 6 months, we've adapted this technology into a virtual space, which we are bringing to you all today. And we'll also use the fishbowl as a kind of metaphor for the edges. If the edges invite us to spatially orient our inner ecology, how might the very structures we inhabit communally reflect those edges? Can the form that we are taking here in its containing of the relationship between the center and the edges or periphery, energetically bring the same kind of flow we might imagine between mainstream finance and its most radical edges? Here, we don't want to blunt the edges, but rather have relational spatial roles. Those in the center, which you're going to experience soon, are the ones holding power and commanding attention. Those at the edges are just as powerful. They are witnesses. They're influencing the center, not only by dipping into it, but also by the ways in which they are able to authentically see and become that which is more radical. So today we offer the social technology as our own kind of healing art for finance, a way of sharing power with you and between an incredible group of Edgewalkers who gratefully volunteered to be here with you all today. So now I would like to invite each of them to introduce themselves briefly before we open the fishbowl. Over to you, Penelise.
All right, Ani, bonjour. My name is Penelise Droz. I am a mom and of a little small crew, and I work for Ending Collective. I'm a power building worker with Ending Collective, and I also do independent support out there in the world with various groups of people to try to transform finance as well as transform the way we develop our nations to contribute to a powerful and regenerative future. Adam, should I just kick it over? I'll kick it over to Kira.
Good morning. I'm Kira Gerwing. I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people, commonly known as Vancouver, British Columbia. I advise two private funds that are genuinely impact directed. We invest in affordable housing and regenerative organic agriculture. I'm a planner by trade and recovering from that by walking the edges of finance. I'll pass it over to Mia.
Thank you, Kira. I'm Mia Diawara. I'm joining today from unceded territory of the Least John Ohlone people, commonly known as Oakland, California. I'm a climate finance advisor, a strategy consultant, and a somatic coach in training. And I believe firmly that how we get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions matters just as much as getting there at all, and that the transition must correct, not exacerbate structural inequities in the way that resources and advantages and disadvantages get distributed and accumulate across populations and ecosystems. I'm excited to be here with all of you today, and I will hand it over to George.
Good evening, everyone. Real privileged to be with you today. My name is George Benson. I'm a writer, researcher, and like Kira, a recovering planner. I work at the intersection of finance, cities, and economic development, with a particular focus on climate action. I'm really privileged and grateful to be here with everyone and this incredible crew, thinking about the edges of finance, particularly from the perspective of value, how we value things in the past, how we can value things in the future, and how the processes of valuation and the ideas of valuation actually shape the structures of the financing that we operate in the world. I'm really grateful to be, again, here with all of you to think and share about that. Thanks. I will pass it on to Cheryl.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Cheryl Chen. I'm a first-generation Taiwanese American, and I live in the temperate rainforest of the United States West Coast in a place called Portland, Oregon. I'm part of a venture called Salmon Collabs, which is a collaboration accelerator for this salmon-based bioregion we live in. Our main focus is to advance regenerative economies centered on local people being able to self-determine the solutions and systems that enable them to thrive. And so grateful for this platform to share our work together. I will pass it to Reiko.
Hi, folks. I'm Reiko. I am an educator, a process consultant, and a medicine man. I also direct the Innovative Learning and Living Institute, or LALI. We align scientific, social, and sacred technologies as a way to support the emergence of equitable and regenerative futures. We're currently stewarding a 22-acre wayfinding hub in response to our polycrisis context for regenerative living, cultural innovation, and community resilience. It's good to be here.
Good morning, relatives across the pond. My name is Pearl Gottschalk. I'm calling in from Treaty 1 Anishinaabe Territory, otherwise known as Winnipeg, Manitoba. I worked managing the Lush Cosmetics Charity Pot Fund, and since then have kickstarted 15 years in Indigenous philanthropy, and with a focus on the edges and the margins and those underserved, and currently working as a storyteller and program advisor for the Indigenous Women's Flow Fund at the Kindle Project. And I'll turn it over to our facilitators.
So we will kick off our fishbowl now. So we will have a few people leave, and you will see them go into the circle surrounding as their authentic witnesses, and we'll be coming in to this dialogue. So maybe I'll just kick us off with the initial prompt, which is, what do we mean by edge walking?
I'll jump in for a second. In some way, the edge walking conversation began with Adam and I having dinner the first night of our experience as positive deviants. And I know some of you heard the positive deviants crew in this event. And Adam and I had this conversation about what does it feel like to be at the edges of finance? And I talked about it feeling sometimes awful, that I felt very isolated. I felt very alone. I felt like the straddle or the stretch between my heart and my values and my body and what the world of finance asked of me was very uncomfortable. And sometimes I felt like a kitten alone in the rain, clinging to a brick building. And that was the beginning of our conversation about what would it be like to build a space that could hold the stretch and give people a space to be together in the edge walking. And so I think it would be interesting to talk a little bit about what is the stretch and how have we been together.
Thanks, Donna. I think for me, you know how people say, oh, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Well, to me, edge walking in a way is all about reinventing the wheel. So, instead of adopting existing solutions, which I would say have often been crafted without us or our status quo and top down, I think edge walking is learning from centers of power that wheels are possible, but how do we reinvent the wheel in ways that are on our own terms for the benefit of our own communities who are connected to this place, to this land, and helps us as a people self-determine what a better future looks like. And that to me is edge walking. And I think actually, secondly, more importantly, it's not just about the actual innovations, such as like a local food hub or a new investment fund or whatnot that comes out of edge walking. It's actually the journey of edge walking itself, the journey of activating the people, bridging divides, weaving a community fabric of how we go about creating local change that I think will be the actual lasting change that propels us into a better future. Meaning, it's in going through and figuring out together common ground and a shared vision for the future is actually how we get back into right relations with each other. And so much of the world right now is designed to divide and conquer us. It's pretty radical to be focused on what connects us. And to me, that's edge walking.
Well, I just want to name too that in what you're saying, Cheryl, it's also permissive. We have there's a we have to give ourselves permission to be at the edges, and also that is both at our personal edges, but also recognizing that our personal edges matter for the kind of transformation that we want to see in the world, and you've named some of those ways, and so that ability to grant oneself permission to stay at the edge, even and feel supported too, which I felt so supported by so many of you in this group, to be at the uncomfortable edges is something that I think is one of the pieces that is involved in edge walking. Is how do we continue to navigate our own permissions and the permissions that are either granted to us or disallowed in the various settings we find ourselves.
Thanks, Adam. I just want to jump in and say, when I actually found the definition in the dictionary of edge, it actually was defined as two faces on a shape that come together and meet. And I thought about when you're in a circle, how different the edge feels at a circle than it does when it's very defined. And I think in philanthropy anyways, we model our work on the saying from permaculture that says the edge is where the action is. And they think of it, the idea of an edge of a pond or the edge of a river system. That's where actually a lot of the life for the whole system is formed and given birth, all the nests, all the protection of the species. And so we think of that our giving and our action of financial transfer of wealth has to be a place that's giving birth to something new, to something that's going to regenerate the whole system.
And I would weigh in that for us as individuals, for me anyway, when I think about, advising investors who want to manifest a new paradigm by bringing capital into, sometimes I think about it like acupuncture, where we're injecting capital as into spots that can stimulate energy that can then dissipate into the system. And as an advisor, into making recommendations for investments into those energy centers. I think one of the things about edge walking is that it has to make sense in our head, but it also needs to make sense in our heart, and it needs to make sense in our gut. And I think that's what Donna was talking about in the opening comments too. We're taking our roles as finance managers, if you want to call it that, and understanding that it isn't just a quantitative exercise, it's a visceral head, heart, gut exercise.
Yeah. And I'd like to share, I feel like the edge that I sit on, my mom is an Anishinaabe, and I grew up in a very, very small Native community. And so a lot of the times I feel like the edge that I'm working with, and Ending Collective, I work with Ending Collective. So we are all Indigenous organization that works to rematriate wealth. And what you shared about energy, like financial resources are energy. Like it's energy that was our financial world was energy that was extracted from the land and people. And so through the work with Ending Collective, we work to channel and guide that energy and those resources back into the land and people, right? And a lot of the times I feel like the edge that I am working within is what I perceive as the reality of the world, which is all resources come from the earth. All finance comes from the earth. And the people and the processes related to the exchange of money have to be accountable and connected to the source, which is the earth. And and also coming from a culture, a lot of folks outside the Indigenous community, when I say Indigenous, Indigenous communities globally, a lot of people whose ancestors have left their Indigenous cultures um, um, are not aware that there are still cultures of people that actively practice to varying degrees our traditional economies of generosity that are connected to that original source of that energy, that life. I feel like I'm on the edge of the finance world with my feet in the culture and the knowledge of the governance and agreements and how that can flow. And not, witnessing the natural economy of generosity that exists and being a little bridge person to remind people that a whole other world really does exist. Whole other ways of relating to each other actually we don't have to invent these things. Circular and solidarity economies, this is not new. It's very, very practical, and it does exist. And here are some ways and teachings that can come help others bring that back into this center, so we don't have this um, the discrepancy between the worlds. But that's my experience.
So much, and that resonated so deeply. And yeah, I think personally, I sit at a similar edge. My ancestry and my family, basically my entire family on my dad's side, is in Mali in West Africa. And that is where I grew up spending time in the summers and experiencing firsthand cultures of generosity and reciprocity and the abundance that comes from solidarity and support. And one of the ways that I think about the edge that we're all walking, is this edge of transition between this system of capitalism that is has been shaped by forces of colonialism, has been shaped by the transatlantic slave trade, cannot be separated from those. And that is the paradigm in which we're operating. And, that is structurally channeling resources in a way that takes undoing. It takes real, active reshaping. And we're kind of on the edge between that paradigm and a paradigm that is truly regenerative and that learns from the ways and the practices. Again, there's some ways in which, to Cheryl's point, it's the call to reinvent the wheel is part of what we are doing. And there are other ways in which that's not what we're doing at all. And in many ways, we're just remembering a lot of what many of us come from, and what existed and has long predated a lot of these structural forces that have brought us into the position we're in now. And so this edge between and the bridge between the existing paradigm and worldviews that really prioritize accumulation and stagnancy and kind of this compounding takes money to make money, that traps finance in very small parts of populations, economies, and the planet, and transitioning into a financial system that is like structurally, circulative and redistributive, and one that operates on principles of generosity, reciprocity, regeneration. It's straddling those two worlds, one foot in one and one foot to step into the other. And I think that the tension that creates it's the feeling of being on the edge.
So much good stuff in all these answers so far. One word I think I want us to daylight a little bit more here is the walking aspect of edge walking. I think many of us are drawn to this work because we work on edges. But I think edge walking is a term I have an ebb and flow with how much it resonates with me. But one of the parts that I think doesn't get as much love as it deserves is the walking aspect. And I think one thing I think you notice, and certainly for all of the folks who've been in the Edge Finance Accelerator together, is we love metaphors. And I think you've heard about 10 amazing metaphors here so far. So let me keep playing with a metaphor here. I think there's a reason why we talk about walking the edges. And I'll be clear, not everybody does, right? There are people who prefer to run. But when we talk about walking, as someone who loves the mountains, I've spent a lot of time in the beautiful mountains here in what we now call British Columbia. There's a reason you walk along edges. It's because some of them are dangerous. And so when we walk and explore with care, I think there's a duality to this that I think is really powerful. And you know, I think both to what Elise and me have just been saying, like there's a tangibility here that's very important as well. But we walk the edges with care because we don't want to fall over. Sometimes what we might fall over into is quite dangerous. And sometimes when we walk with care, we can identify the perfect route to get to where we want to go. But it's the walking that, to me, that is illustrative and emblematic of the care that we want to be embodying when we do this work, because we know how high the stakes are. We know the incredible damages that the system we live in today has wrought on the world, and we are not looking to repeat that. And so we walk those edges to discover what is possible on the other side. And I think Cheryl talking about reinventing the wheel, and sometimes we want to reinvent the wheel, I think it's such an important comment to make. And I think one of the things that I feel like a lot of my edge walking colleagues here do is to actually go even a step further than reinventing the wheel. It's to ask the question, is the wheel what we need? Do you need a wheel to go upstairs? Is that the right mechanism to move through a space in that way? Do you need a wheel to be in the water? Maybe, maybe not. There's a question of applicability and context that I think we also often resonate with. And whether that's with the interface with nature, many of us here think about the ways in which we value nature and work with it. Is a wheel the right way to do that, or is there something else? And I think the multitude of examples that we are all drawn to, many of them I think culturally derived, which is so important for us to be rooted in place and space. Those examples are, I think, what can offer options beyond a wheel. And those options, I think, are some of the richness that, you know, events like this and or networks like ours here are playing with, identifying the full range of means of conveyance beyond just wheels. And I think that's some of my favorite parts of this work, is to identify that whole library, that whole warehouse of all the ways of moving around that are inclusive of wheels, but not only of wheels.
I love this. So many threads. I think in addition to, and I love the notion of permission, because it's sometimes it's difficult, challenging to feel like we have a permission to be on the edge. And I think in addition to permission, there's also, for many of us, a reclamation of the dignity of being on the edge or being minoritized, a real reclamation of that. And I think in particular, those of us from a grief community, the minoritized communities, if there has been a lack in a modern context of resources, the value is in the imagination and the practicality and the necessity of the imaginal. And it wasn't not just the province of visionary entrepreneurs who are creating products for the next XYZ. It's actually how are we actually using and working with the imagination in relationship to place. It's very place-based, that enables us to protect ourselves, that enables us to fall apart when we need to fall apart, because not just the poly crisis, but the social conditioning and interactions that happen because of these contexts. And then also potentially being able to transform. So the regenerative continuum of dissolution, of falling apart, of being resilient and transforming, is also at the edges. And so much that those folks whose bodies have been marked other, in whatever context, and many of us have throughout history, we know this kind of imagination, the value of it has been brought into the center and then in the modern context made into product, culturally skinned and sold back. And there's a cultural logic to that, and we understand that. And this is just to provide another context of what edge walking is. But it really calls forth for me the importance and potency of imagination, especially in conversations when we talk about the practical. So when I'm working with folks who are wealth holders or decolonizing wealth, or who are trying to imagine what's next, it's really giving permission, but also context for the ways in which minoritized and edge communities have always had to by necessity. And then because of the necessity, they've been really, really creative in terms of how we understand resources and generative value exchange, however we want to language it. Yeah. And kind of to Penny Elise's point, there's so much more in terms of broader wisdom economies and types of value exchange. And so one of the challenges, in realizing what has worked and exists in edge communities, indigenous communities, in terms of understanding value and value exchange, but also the tension with what's the next expression of a more regenerative, equitable way of living. Because we can't go back. I mean, we can, but I think that's really challenging. We could romanticize going back to the way things were, even though some of those things exist in some intact communities. But I think the challenges during a time of epistemic crisis, where we have multiple perspectives and worldviews, is what is a real, true generative narrative in which people feel inspired, aspirational, but also grounded in the truth. And the one that I've been noticing has been very useful is, for polycrisis, for change networks and wealth holders and activists. A number of things is that we are going through an initiation. Polycrisis are the conditions for initiation that's happening in a global context. And if we go back far enough in all of our ancestral lineages, everybody went through initiations. Everyone went through rites of passage. It's something that's really, really lost now in our modern times. That's only starting to bubble up because, quite honestly, the planet, and we need it. The planets are the ones who are holding it. The planets are the space holders for this time and way of learning that is needing to emerge. And so if we are learning or exploring this narrative of we're going through a global rite of passage, and we're being compelled to learn to live in new ways, including how we know, then it gets a little bit more interesting in how we explore imagination, especially in relationship to others in place. And that brings a whole broader and deeper, richer sense of what it means to engage in wealth.
Thank you so much, Reiko, for speaking into that. As I think about a lot of the work that I've done, working across different tribes, but also working outside of our tribes to do, my background is engineering and infrastructure design, and as well, like community design. And all of us have been impacted, no matter who we are, we've all been impacted by colonial cultures and forces, right? And so there are varying states of, retaining teachings, various states of, how can we, of guidance to move forward in a good way. But one thing that I've noticed is sort of can bring people together across cosmologies, can bring people together across common denominators, is something I've actually seen a lot of my colleagues here on the, in our fishbowl have centered a lot of their work in is values. And our different cosmologies and ways of believing about the world, they do inform our values. But I have noticed that when we bring people together over, what are the values that make you who you are as a people? What are the things that you value? And working backwards from that to design economies, to design businesses, to design infrastructure, community infrastructure, and to design social governance. Social governance is key. Healing and social governance is key, because without that, it's all going to crumble anyway. And so, yes, our Indigenous folks have, we do have teachings of how to be, a lot of the terms that we use at Indian Collective is, are we being good relatives? Are we being good relatives to each other? Okay, how can we create agreements where we're going to be good relatives to one another? How are we going to be good relatives to the earth that sustains our life? But there are common denominators if we sink deeply into those values and don't let them go. I have noticed. I've also noticed, science is the study of creation, and so, um, you know, spirituality is a study of creation and science is a study of creation. And I've noticed that leaning into, social ecological resilience science, as far as what it teaches about how to reconnect with those earth teachings of how to design and develop our communities, including our social governance, can be another common denominator to bring folks together.
I wonder if I could bring in the context that we're sitting at the end of a day of incredible people doing incredible work in the world that I think are profiling so many of those values and walking and standing at these edges, looking across the, the thresholds of what we might be initiated into that you're describing, Reiko, as well, in this polycrisis mode and saying, how does it become more? I mean, how does this become, do we step in as edgewalkers and by walking together, we are gesturing towards another possible finance? But is there also, what I'd like to bring in, is there a context here as we talk about how the edges might transform finance, of seeing finance as something that's kind of the sublime or something that's sacred? I mean, per your narrative piece that you were bringing in, Reiko, are we asking finance to become something else? And how are we asking those questions? How are we bringing that forward? Because it's imagination, and it's definitely models, and it's also connecting with those frameworks that have worked, as Penelise is sharing. But there's a spirited aspect to this question that we haven't yet cracked in this space, and I wonder if that might open something up.
One way in which in our work practically, actually, working at the edges is through the use of flow funding, which is a type of reparative philanthropy that really takes the money and shifts it out of the power of traditional wealth holders and into the hands of, in our case, Indigenous matriarchs in community who have traditionally always been solving the problems of their own communities. And so in a way, it's transforming finance to become back towards that which it was traditionally. And it's asking modern day people who have accumulated wealth in different systems to actually honor that and return back to that. And it means taking some risks, and it can be scary. So that's one way in which we're practically asking philanthropy and wealth transfer to walk at the edge, stay in the scary zone.
Yeah. And Pearl, that really resonates with me, because as an investment advisor, until we have the person or the group or the community with the imagination to do something edgy, something regenerative, something emergent, whatever the opportunity is, until we have that, the money that we have to spend doesn't have any value.
I think maybe to pick up on that, Adam, to your question, what is that? What I heard in your question was, what is the potential of finance in its reimagining? And I think if we look back historically, the power of finance has been in its ability to abstract incomparable things into something that seems comparable, right? The power of money is fungibility, the ability to move things that have just incredible variations and say these things are the same. And I think if I had to put a very blunt and unthought through point on where finance might take us, it is to create ways in which regenerative, positive, justice-oriented ways in which the incomparable can be maybe squinted at and seen to have some similarities. There can be something that unites those experiences. And I think, Kira, what you're describing of like the lack of value placed on those investments, that work that you're doing, that there's two needs that come out of that for me. One is for the work that you're doing and many others are doing to show that there is, tangible, practical value in doing that work. That needs to continue. And at the same time, the structures, the rules that we set that govern how we value things in our financial systems, in our actuarial systems, those need to change. And I think of, very complex but increasingly tangible work like the task force on nature-related financial disclosures, to say, okay, we think on the one hand, nature is irreplaceable, beautiful, life-giving, and we need a way to put a value on it in the system we currently operate. So we will just, identify ways of payments for ecosystem services or the valuation of natural assets, et cetera, et cetera. So this duality of acknowledging and celebrating the irreplaceable and finding a way to make it fungible, we live in the tension of that. We have to stay with the trouble of those two very, very conflicting ideas. But I think if we can get something there better than what we have now, we will advance much more of the kinds of work that I think Pearl and Kara were referring to.
I'll just jump in because, oh,
you go ahead.
I mean, I just want to bring into this space the importance of, and this is work that we've all been doing, and one of the things that I think has been really unique about this accelerator, but the internal and intrapersonal transformation work that kind of serves as the foundation, right, through principles of emergence. Anything we hope to bring about at large scale, complexity is created through relatively simplistic relational interactions, and that is where the change needs to happen as well. And so I just want to name that as that is the healing of each of us and our relationships with one another and our relationships with the more than human world is what ultimately turns finance into a tool of healing.
Yeah, I'll just say really quick, because I know we're running out of time, but as we know, finance is energy, and I think a lot of us do believe that the solution to the poly crisis is going to be bottom up. It's going to be through catalyzing local solutions. And I think the space that we've talked a lot about in the Finance Accelerator is what are those social governance? What are those community structures that can be put in place to help propel forward these local solutions? For example, in British Columbia, 95% of British Columbia is unceded territory. And this idea of a watershed isn't a jurisdiction that currently has officially being governed. And so where is that space, or that there's a space here for us to sort of imagine and reinvent what it could look like to come together as a community, focus on what's connecting us based on the land, and to create these sort of social governance structures based on shared values. That is an exciting place to be. So I just wanted to add that in as a possible avenue.
I feel like we could go for an hour more, but I know we have to wrap up. And I think the last couple of things that show up for me is that there's this idea that the edges are and the margins are the problems, and we have to flip that script, because the edges are actually the places where people are more creative, more adaptable, more innovative. So why does the money not move to these people and places? That is the question that I would like to prompt you and leave you with, because there is this incredible opportunity if we flow capital to these edges. And you've heard from the wise people that are holding these edges. And I'm a scatterling, like lots of people on this stage. My people come from many places: Picts, Angles, Druids, Vikings, Anishinaabe, and there's something so powerful about the edges, not just in terms of the opportunity to do transformational work and the lack of access to capital, but there's also, if you notice, an incredible amount of emotional regulation and competency. These are people with sharp edge aptitudes and smooth emotional competencies. And there's something about that confluence that I think is the future of leadership. And so I'm really grateful that we had the chance to introduce you to some of this genius from the margins and the edges that is going to transform finance.
Thank you, everyone.
And if you want to learn more, there's an info session on June 21st that you can find access to on our website if you want to learn more about walking the edges with us.